While making an intervention on the last occasion on this subject, made some suggestions for the constitution of a fund for mitigation and adaptation on environmental challenges. In that first intervention of mine, sir, I had given an overall global framework of why we needed such a fund, what the costs are likely to be, and what are the various dimensions on account of adaptation and mitigation problems. And that, in addition to financing and technology, we needed to take a holistic view of the entire issue. In today's intervention of mine, sir, I wish to concentrate on two basic problems. First, on how to raise the money, from what sources, and to recall that one of the principal objectives of the Environmental Adaptation and Mitigation Fund is to move away from inefficient, highly polluting, energy-intensive industries. And second, equally, how to spend the money. And this goes beyond merely the normal question of expenditure, but into the deeper question of how to make the governance of this fund multidisciplinary, complementary, and catalyst to the efforts of the private sector, which is capable of keeping pace with the emerging science and technology on this issue. I want to be clear about the scope of what I'm discussing, therefore, today, sir. This is not a fund to address every challenge of environment. It is not, because those challenges are far more complex. What I'm focusing on today is how we can best use innovative public finance mechanisms to both push people away from unsustainable practices and pull new technologies and practices which are more sustainable and support the adaptation effort of government. Let me also say that in making this suggestion, I'm conscious of the broad inequities in our economy, namely the context that large parts of this country do not have access to energy at all, and therefore there must be a floor level of minimum energy availability in any effort which we design. Let me also just remind you, sir, that estimates which have been made, globally speaking, on what it would cost for mitigation and adaptation efforts to bring the greenhouse emission to levels which are considered safe on current scientific estimates, people estimate that globally speaking they would require an investment of $200 billion to $1 trillion per annum. These estimates can increase if, for instance, the scientific community comes to the conclusion that the present levels of projected reduction in greenhouse emissions should be more aggressive in order to really deal with the environmental challenges. So these estimates, sir, are ballpark estimates. Let me now directly go to this important question which I had raised: how to raise the money for the Environmental Adaptation and Mitigation Fund in India. Clearly, sir, the first and one obvious source is to have a carbon tax in order to promote low carbon intensive activity. This creates a push for cleaner technology. We already have the energy cess on coal to start with. So what I will discuss is how to complement and supplement this broad measure of the cess on coal in other dimensions. This environmental mitigation fund would complement the coal tax by focusing more on downstream fuel use, especially highly polluting fuels, as well as fuel use for upper income groups. Some revenue streams to tap these which are consistent with this approach are: first, a diversion of cess on aviation turbine fuel. We clearly need to harmonize this across the states to reduce distortions, but one option is to keep the level the same while diverting some part of the accrual of this aviation turbine fuel cess towards the Environmental Adaptation and Mitigation Fund. This is also quite consistent with the recommendations of the global discussion of tax on air travel. Second, taxing small fossil fuel power generation, including smaller captive power plants. This is actually inefficient power generation and is unfortunately encouraged by the current electricity policy scenario. Raising the cost of substitutes for an efficient public network would create more pressures for faster improvement in the electricity sector. Third, a surcharge on per capita energy usage above a certain level. This would only hurt the more elite class, therefore. It would protect the poor, sir. This would preserve the access to electricity, such as it is, for essential needs, but would also encourage those who can afford to trim their electricity bills by investing in more efficient electrical appliances. The modalities of applying this needs to be worked out, given the concurrent jurisdiction over electricity policy and the state dominance in setting electricity prices. Fourth, sir, increased tax on lower grade, that means higher